All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for our next session in the event, AI and Talent Acquisition, from automating tasks to strategic transformation, sponsored by Eightfold AI. This webcast has been pre-approved for one HRCI business credit and one SHRM credit. So please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive these credits. They will be in your HR.com account within 24 hours, and we will also send an email to live attendees with your credit information. So during this engaging webcast, we hope that you participate in the chat. You can choose everyone from the drop-down box in that chat. And then questions for any of the presenters, we ask that you place those in the Q&A box in the webinar controls. Therefore, they just won't get lost in the shuffle there. And I think that's all the logistics on my end. It is now my absolute pleasure to turn it over to Teresa Wykes to get us started.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rhonda. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Quick introduction from me. My name is Teresa Wykes. I'm part of our talent-centered transformation team at Eightfold. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to have two amazing people in my world join us today to talk about AI. It's a very big topic. So, we're going to focus on a few specific areas, but I think probably before we get started, Elke, would you like to introduce yourself? And then Hung, you can introduce yourself after Elke, please.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. Excited to join today around with AI topics and technology since a few years. I've made some experience myself and always keen to see experiences that other companies are making. I think it's a big topic, as you said, Teresa. So it's good we have enough opportunity to exchange about it. I'm leading the talent team at UiPath, a company that's in the midst of automation and AI. So from that perspective, glad to be here today.
Thanks, Elke. Hung.
Hi everyone. My name's Hung Lee. So I still self-identify as a recruiter, even though it's been a decade or so since I last sent the CV in anger. But these days I work really more as I consider myself like an ecosystem support person. So I see my role as really trying to connect everyone who's involved in the act of recruiting, whether you're a recruiter, HR person, candidate, technology company, events business. Let's get the conversations going between all of those folks and see whether the information transfer that takes place from that can just help everyone else get a little bit more inspired and a little bit more equipped for the future that we have ahead of us.
Excellent. Thank you, Hung. So great representation from various sides of the coin here. We've got Elke, who's working in-house, and then we've got Hung, who is a kind of, I'd say, a great curator of all sorts of information. So this is a massive topic. I think probably the best, and I don't, we're going to have a fairly informal conversation here. So this is a chat. Hopefully, some of it be quite robust. Not an interview. I think maybe a good place for us to start then is really, let's start at sort of at the beginning. So we're here to talk about talent acquisition, but I think let's maybe stay close to our purpose, which is the business context. I don't know, maybe we can start thinking about how we should consider AI in a business context first and foremost. And perhaps Elke, maybe you could talk about what you've witnessed or what you're experiencing from that angle at UiPath.
Yeah, I may talk about my time at SAP as well, as we experimented with AI in TA there already. And I think if you're already on the journey, you have started it, or you're reflecting to get there, I think the starting question for me is, are you just trying to get some operational efficiencies, which is an important topic for all of us? Or are you embedding what you're trying to do with AI into achieving your strategic goals? And the latter one goes beyond, let's say, increasing speed of hiring. That could be a goal. But where I wonder is, are we getting to the point where AI will identify the talent gaps for us, where AI will guide us to say, you know, for the skills that you're looking for, this is the best place, this is the best market to tap into. So those are the whole skills topic is obviously a big one, right? Where I believe that in the future, TA and talent development will need to work much, much closer together if we're all building on a skill foundation and maybe not focusing that much on the classical job descriptions any longer. So I think those are all bigger strategic questions in the context of a company's aim to get the best and maybe most diverse talent. And that is where I must admit, I haven't seen that much impact of AI yet. I think we're at this point still optimizing operational stuff, which is a good point to be. I don't want to diminish that because I think it gives us the room and the space to focus more on strategic tasks. And that is, from my perspective, the big opportunity that we have.
Okay. Do you want to talk a little bit more, Elke, about where you were seeing some of those processes, perhaps at SAP, being refined by the introduction of AI, or even at UiPath?
Yeah. So where I started to really experience this tangibly was with a tool that we implemented to pre-select applicants and give the recruiter a ranked list of applications that meet best a certain jobs requirements, right? So that is the first time that I kind of really I've seen it into practice. That was back 2020, I believe. So maybe somewhat early. And I think some learnings from there are still true today when I'm talking to some of my peers as well. And I would say a first one is don't expect miracles. It's not, you don't plug it in and the world has changed overnight. You may need to refine some things in your approach, in your process, in the underlying data. And I think it's very wise to make your team part of the journey as you make your customers part of the journey, right? Because if you're in a position that you have decided for a technology, in this situation, we had the recruiter being required to give a thumbs up or thumbs down to the pre-selection that the tool has done. Now, making sure recruiters understand that and understand that 5 seconds investment is really crucial because the AI needs to learn in the specific context. I don't think you can buy one that just does exactly what you want it to do in the context of your business, of your company, of your job requirements. So making sure that people understand it's a journey, the world won't be better overnight. Everybody needs to contribute to a certain extent for a while until it really yields the outcome that we want. And then one aspect that is important as well here from a business context perspective, if you're not working for a company that is coding these AI tools themselves, you have a financial investment, right? So you've made a business case, somebody has approved that, and then you'd better be in a position 6 months later to say, this is what we achieved. So from that perspective, I think the KPI aspect is important as well. I think it's crucial to define what you want to achieve and monitor that, and then be able to call it success or failure, maybe, which I think, especially in this context, still needs to be accepted as well.
Okay, excellent. Hung, did you have anything to add to that in terms of that business context, maybe examples that you've seen?
Not really. I think Elke's really covered it really well. I mean, that entire sort of monologue really is kind of encapsulating what the current challenge is and what the opportunity is. What I think is interesting for me is sort of why is it that companies are really struggling to get there? And I think 2024 has really been that year where probably most people have accepted that there's going to be a significant opportunity with the use of artificial intelligence in terms of improving business efficiencies and operational processes, and even things like candidate experience, and all of those are more intangible stuff. We know it's going to have these plus impacts there. But the vast majority of companies have not moved on from just that acceptance to operationalization. So what is the thing that's stopping that operationalization from going on? And I think Elka might have mentioned a little bit. It's the classic change management type of scenario. And we need to understand that asking people to change processes that they've been successful at and actually efficient at is going to be, a painful process. Like there has to be some sort of acceptance that there's a switching cost where your operational efficiency will decrease as you're moving and learning into a new process. And I think that's the crisis we have sort of in 2024. How that crisis sharpens in 2025 is I don't think we're going to be able to stay in that liminal state for another year. I think the business is going to expect to have dramatic improvements in terms of how recruitment operates. And we can't have another year saying, look, we haven't got the bandwidth, we haven't got this, that, the other. We really need to move forward at that point. So trying to unpack why that is, and maybe trying to figure out certain ways in which we could advise people to block some of those obstacles, I think could be a very useful thing for everyone to try and do.
Yeah,
can I build on that, Teresa?
Please go ahead, Elsa. Yeah.
Just in terms of the change management, because I believe it's very fundamental to address as well the concerns that people have, and I feel like sometimes we're just like getting on this ship with a lot of excitement and curiosity, and that's good. But I think if you're implementing these tools, people may feel you're taking away part of their work, at least, right? And then I think this is a big task for leaders primarily to make sure first they acknowledge that that is the case, and we want it to be the case, right? Because we want those repetitive tasks to go away ideally and be done by the technology. At the same time, I believe we need to help recruiters to understand what are they doing then, because the fear may actually be I'm losing my job, right? I think we're by far not there. And again, I think this is an opportunity for recruiting specifically to finally potentially get into that talent advisor role where we have all the data at our fingertips, where we have the process in the background taken care of by technology, and you can focus on, Hang touched upon it, candidate experience, really briefing candidates for the interview, good debrief. I think we're all still hearing that applicants are disappointed to some extent with the experience that they're getting, never getting a feedback, being ghosted. All of that stuff is out there, right? And that is the opportunity for recruiters to tap in and change that experience significantly.
Yeah,
On that, AI can definitely help with that CV black hole experience. I don't want to prescribe sort of things that the recruiters can do, but probably it's now become a low-hanging fruit for us to try and get a quick win. Because one of the biggest problems that we've had is obviously, I think recruiters have the goodwill to get back to people and, do a good job.
Yeah.
But we're overwhelmed by different things to do, and it inevitably goes sort of down in our priority list, and we end up making human errors, or it skips us, and we're not able to get there. But artificial intelligence, like one of the base use cases, should be being able to ferry information to the candidates and to anybody in the process without any latency, without any delay, without any error. So the AI can do this, and I just wonder whether that may be one of the quick wins. I see Angela's mentioned something in the chat there. Where are the quick results from AI? Maybe there's a little project we can do there to try and like improve the candidate experience. Can we give them sort of feedback within 24 hours upon them performing this task or being in this sort of event in the recruiting flow? Like just focus on that and see whether we can move that number. And I think tech is generally there that can help us do that. And that will give people confidence, give the candidates a big sort of boost, and you'll then have some data to go back to your business and say, look, we can make these improvements. We need more time to do this, the next thing. So yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting what you were talking about, Elke, with the whole change management piece. I think there's some general advice along the lines of when you're looking at your workflows, you should always invite AI to the table, as in you should consider it, bring it along. And then and it sounds a bit of a cliche now, but you're needing to be the human in the loop. Define actually what that role should be. And then I read something the other day that you should be treating AI like an intelligent but inexperienced intern. So, it's there to serve us. It's not there to take over from us. It's there to complement. And there's obviously different degrees in terms of, whether you're using it for automation or it's an agent. But Hung, in terms of where we are with it, I think I feel that it's going to get more. I think the versions of AI that we're using, like if you're starting now, it's going to get a lot more sophisticated in the future. So it's not like whatever we're doing now, there's going to be, we're going to go much further down that road. I think it's also interesting to think about, actually, okay, we say that AI is going to free us up to do all these jobs that we couldn't do before. There's two things there. I think the first thing is that actually AI gives you data, or AI does jobs that no one did before, actually. So it's not like we're just we're just sort of passing off things that we don't want to do anymore, or that waste our time. It's actually completely different data, completely different tasks. It does work that no one ever did. But secondly, where does that leave recruiters, actually? Because I think the trouble with a lot of recruiters now is that some of their roles are necessarily quite transactional. And I think being an advisor or being consultative, or maybe, flexing emotional intelligence muscles, or really properly, deeply engaging with candidates is actually quite different from the role that they've done before. So, I wonder whether actually that would be something that we need to think about.
On that note, just to jump in, 2 years ago, I asked ChatGPT to rank the 100 skills and activities that a recruiter currently performs. And from there, force rank them 1 to 100 as to which ones that ChatGPT felt it would basically be able to replace. And it was actually very interesting to just observe what the AI thought it was capable of replacing and what the AI thought it was not capable of replacing. And I took the top 20 of each category. So in other words, the top 20 skills and activities that AI thought they could basically do, and then the top 20 that the AI thought they couldn't do, and just map them. And it just very obviously that the work that recruiters currently doing was exactly the areas that were most exposed to AI in the sense that AI thought it could eventually do this. And there's a bunch of stuff that actually recruiters were quite unfamiliar with, that AI thought, actually no, I don't feel particularly confident that I could do this. So the job is going to transform, I would say. It's a good signal. I think the job's going to transform. We need to be active agents in transforming that, I would say. So in other words, we need to take positive action to change it. And I do believe there's both opportunity and risk in all of this, because it's, I think, like quite naive to just assume that the time saved by artificial intelligence will automatically transmute into this higher level work that recruiters will just instantly end up doing, because the business does not think like this. The business in 2024 has been asking TA to do more with less. Okay. So even in a company or a function that has done more with less, next year it's going to be do even more with even less, right? It's going to be keep on doing this. So what we in TA and HR, and in fact every department that's exposed to AI, which is everyone, have to do is to negotiate back with the business what to do with the productivity gains that we've achieved. If I can go to my boss and say, hey, I've just saved your hiring managers 5,000 hours of time this year, that translates into this amount of money. We need to have that investment back in the things that you say you care about, like diversity and inclusion, let's say, or improving candidate experience, or let's say improving employee engagement. All of those things that very often are dismissed, or very often, are we rhetorically say that they're priorities, but when we run into adversity, they're the first things that drop off the list.
Yeah.
We in TA and HR have got to argue for that, and we can't be naive to think that just being efficient is going to lead to us doing that work. We have to basically have some consciousness about what that extra time is going to be, and we have to negotiate for it.
Yeah, I would totally agree to that. You need to have your business case, and you need to tie it to your strategy. I think that's where you're getting the buy-in from the business, and obviously, as you said, showing them where you can improve, where you can save time, not only for TA but as well for the business leaders, who sometimes are quite frustrated with how TA processes work, right? How much investment is required from their side, even to the point, of writing job descriptions, which really shouldn't be required these days any longer. But there is a few of those very basic tasks that are still happening sometimes on the business side. And I must say, I feel with them, and I think, again, that's an angle for us to do a good job in terms of making sure we have everybody in the change journey to understand their contribution, but as well their benefit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Got a couple of comments and questions. So we've got a question here. Rory is interested to know whether we've ever encountered any algorithmic bias with AI screening, and if so, what did you do to counter this? Alka, maybe, do you have anything to share on that?
Yeah. So for that piece of technology that I talked about in terms of pre-selecting applicants, the KPI that we set for ourselves is that ultimately 75% of the applicants that the technology rates as AB, like the best ones, need to end up in interviews. We defined that as the quality criteria for the technology, and we have seen for a few weeks that that was not the case. Like, we had applicants ranked AB weren't selected by the hiring manager to come into the interview. So obviously, the AI did something wrong. So we found out that in terms of how we describe criteria in job descriptions or the job requirements, that was not exactly helpful to how the AI is working. And we actually, with the company at that point in time that we worked with, worked closely to change that. They ultimately did adjust the algorithm to some extent, and we adjusted our job requirements definition. And from there, we've seen a different outcome, but it took us a while to get to the root cause of the problem. Which again brings me back to my point of don't expect miracles. You really need to have the thing in practice in your context to see what it does in terms of what you want it to do, and where there may be a gap that needs to be closed.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? You can actually tune the AI to your requirement. You do have that agency. You're not like, we're not slaves to it. It works for us. It serves us. So you can change things.
Yeah, that's true, Teresa. But I would want to add maybe one comment to that, because I think, we're talking about how our work is changing. And I think in that context, where we all need to be prepared to go deeper is on understanding what the technology does, right? Because there may be nobody in your company who can help you. You really need to work deeply and closely with that provider to get to the root cause and get them fixed. So I think our whole kind of stakeholder map maybe a bit more intense in this context than in the past as well. For these type of implementations, you would want to work closely, obviously, with IT, but as well with your legal function, for example, because let's say it does discriminate, worst case, you need to be prepared for that.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because it forces you into the world of technology in a way that you probably thought you wouldn't need to bother with before. Helga, how did you, maybe when you were at SAP, how did you decide how far you needed to go with your own personal knowledge? Because you need a level of understanding, don't you? But you don't need to become an AI specialist entirely. I guess it's the level of awareness. And also interested to know what kind of support you had around that from the rest of the business.
Yeah, I think you're touching a good point, Teresa. You need to pull in your network, right? I'm likely not going to be an engineer in my professional life any longer, I guess. So there is a level where you can push for understanding, ask the right questions, go into depths, go into detail, but you get to a point where it's just beyond your knowledge and your understanding, right? And I think that's where it's key to involve your partners, so to say, that is IT. If you have an AI engineering team, why don't you invite an engineer from that team, because they know best, right? And you may have a data protection officer or some type of that function. That's a good partner to involve. And then again, compliance and legal, because this quickly gets you into an area where you need those specialists to make sure what you're doing is not creating any issues down the line.
Yeah.
As well, from a candidate perspective, right? From an applicant perspective, what happens with my data if AI on a company side is working with my data is a big question, right? So you very operationally may need to update your communication to applicants on, we have AI in the loop, and this is how we safely work with your data.
Yeah. I think, there was a Harvard Business Review report and then Hung, I want to ask you about something, because I know you have a view on this kind of role of Chief Automation Officer as well, as a sort of new role in the world of AI. Harvard Business Review said that leaders should be able to provide context, identify content, lead with their heart, and ask good questions. So in other words, it's not so important to discern all the answers or even to know how to leverage the algorithm. So I think that's probably something that's going to, develop and will always be on leaders' minds. But Hung, you talked a bit in some of your recent newsletters about having this, organizations might need a Chief Automation Officer. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and where you see that maybe meeting needs and maybe not meeting needs?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, basically, one thing we do know is that the C-level are very disappointed at the rate of automation or the use of AI at every level of their business. So there's no bigger enthusiast for artificial intelligence and automation than C-level. They can see the productivity gains and they're feeling really quite disappointed that the heads of function are not delivering for the reasons that we've discussed. There's a change management issue. There's basically hot swapping one system to another system. It's, we're already massively under pressure, very difficult. So we need to unpack that. But I think there is a case to be made that there may be a specialist function that might emerge that will actually go and start examining sort of people's functions, people's workflows, and see whether automation can particularly improve that, or whether you particularly want automation to improve it at that point. It could be, for instance, that you decide that you don't want to have a highly efficient, overly efficient way of working because you might lean a bit more on, let's say, improving experience. So automation may require, so the failure of all of our functions to automate may mean that a new kind of function might evolve that will help other departments do it. In other words, conduct the analysis as to how, time and motion studies, how the thing is currently done now, have understanding with the vendor landscape or the technology sort of innovation landscape to then be able to recommend solutions and maybe even project manage them in ways that is a classic change management type of function. So Chief Automation Officer isn't my idea. It's an idea a friend of mine actually published 2 years ago and said, yeah, maybe this is an idea. Thought it was a really good one. And then I thought, actually, a lot of the responsibilities within that hypothetical role kind of overlap a little bit with a lot of the stuff that people in the people team do. understanding how people work, understanding what the job specs are, and so on. So I just wonder whether that may be a kind of a way in which TA or HR might expand scope to become an automation force within that organization. Because if we don't do it, basically they're going to call the consultants in and they'll do it. If you look at all of the big four, big consultancies, the McKinseys, the Accentures, EYs, all of that, all of those companies are not actually performing particularly well in terms of their margins, apart from the AI functions within each of those businesses. So there's a huge demand for companies that are going to these consultancies and saying, help us automate, help us get more efficient. Now, no disrespect to that function, but as soon as they walk in, they're going to start making changes and saying, you're not automating fast enough, and then we're going to be completely at the mercy of those instructions. I would much prefer that an automation function organically emerge within the existing business. I see no reason why someone in TA or HR can't do that.
Interesting.
Yeah, if I can add to that, Teresa, I think there's again thinking in opportunities rather than risks. There is a unique spot that HR is in the sense that many of our tools are touched by everybody in the company, right? A TA tool is not touched only by TA, it's touched by internal employees who apply, it's touched by hiring managers, interviewers, whatsoever. So I think that is an opportunity for us as well, and getting a bit of a call for courage and risk taking out here to kind of lead the change to some extent, right? Because if we bring it quickly touches everybody, and that's a great opportunity to show how we can kind of step ahead potentially.
Yeah, thank you. Just checking questions again. We've got a question from Angela here. She says, we very basic AI tools like ChatGPT right now for our recruiting team, and we'd like to see in what ways you can use that to make more efficiencies in TA. So, ChatGPT available to everybody. Anyone want to talk about how that can make a difference?
So I can start, and Hung, maybe you can add. I think we're all using it to some extent for us individually, right? And obviously, if I'm in the whole communication with applicants, hiring managers, and so on, it can help. But my view is, make sure it's personalized enough for that situation and for that context. So what I think would the best approach be is to personalize it for your applications with your context, with what you want to bring across as a company to the talent you're trying to attract. And for that, it probably needs to be a bit more specific than what ChatGPT gives you, is my experience. I'm not sure, Hung, any views on your side?
Yeah, it's very interesting how we kind of encounter AI sort of as professionals. And ChatGPT was probably everyone's first AI, sort of say. And it was a miracle solution. It still is. It's fantastic for things like copywriting and content generation and even ingesting large amounts of text and having that summarize stuff and all the rest of it. I think what is interesting to me is that all of the kind of key features or functions of artificial intelligence are starting to become very easily available in multiple places. ChatGPT initially was great at message composition, let's say, and then suddenly LinkedIn can do that, and Google's now been able to do it, and Microsoft can do it. So what we're seeing really is a lot of the generative AI basics, so to say, are now being encountered in multiple places, not just ChatGPT. And I think what we're likely to do as recruiters is that we're going to kind of use the predominant software that we're always kind of either needing to use due to compliance reasons or simple cultural habits. And that product will end up having huge amounts of AI in it. And that's going to be our default interface. So let's say you're using an ATS. Every ATS right now has just been pumping out AI-powered features at you. So you're going to be AI enabled even if you don't sort of, even if you're a refusenik, you're going to end up using these types of tools. Now, I don't think this is a good or bad thing. I think where we're at with us as professionals is that we just need to be very, very fluent with the usage of it. We need to stop like dipping our toes in, but really spend time to get the maximum juice out of that lemon. The worst thing we can do, I think, is, and I'm guilty as everyone, by the way. I'm not some expert of user of AI. I find myself struggling because I've got a existing non-AI system and I'll defer to that. But I know that is an inefficient way and I'll be outcompeted, if not tomorrow, then will be in 3 months or 6 months or some other months down the track. So I don't think I've actually answered the question here really, but ultimately what I'm saying is that the leadership of TA teams have got to create the bandwidth for the TA teams to feel that they can experiment. And this is very, very difficult to do because we're all working at 120% maxed out capacity, right? So we're kind of like driving the car 100 mile an hour down the freeway, and we've got to swap out all the tires. That's what we've got to try and do. Now we need a pit stop really to do that. But in order for us to do a pit stop, we have to talk to the business and negotiate, as I mentioned to you guys earlier, like if we can negotiate a deal with them to say, look, we're going to change our process. There's going to be a temporary injection of inefficiency as a result of that. But what we expect to have happen once we've done this is that these things will occur. And if they do occur, then I want more backing for us to do more of this kind of swapping. And that's the sort of conversation that leaders, I think, need to take on board.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And I think we're going to see a bit of a resurgence of some of these sort of more, maybe some skills that we've kind of forgotten, like problem solving, just learning, just actually having to learn stuff. I think there's a big gap in actually understanding the limits of AI, because it's not, I think, there's a sort of misconception that it can solve all these problems, but it only learns on what it's been fed. So, there's the ethical side of it. There's also the hygiene side of it. And I think there's a responsibility definitely for leaders just to make sure that people actually appreciate what those limits and risks can be. The question,
Teresa, on the reskilling piece, I think Hang has touched on that, and it's a really important one, I believe. And maybe I'm stating the obvious, but there is a sentence out there that I like, which says, you won't be replaced by AI, but you may be replaced by people who know how to deal with AI, right? So in that context, and as well considering the constant evolution of the technology, that's changing rapidly. I think we need to be prepared for constant reskilling, right? And probably people know, and I'm stating the obvious here, but there is opportunities out there in the context of citizen developer trainings, right? Microsoft is doing that, UiPath is doing that, many big companies are doing it. And it's an somewhat easy way to get started. And what we've done at UiPath is really making sure that many of our colleagues have the opportunity to get that certification. And then we had once per quarter a day where people did come in after they had kind of the training, and they came with their ideas, and they had that day free to do their own little automation. And it's been a lot of fun for the team. It's been a great exchange, and there was a real outcome in terms of processes improved and time saved. So that could be just one approach that may work for people.
That sounds great. That sounds really interesting. Please keep the questions coming. I particularly just want us to talk a bit about candidate experiences here. So we touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think a lot of roads in AI, if you're in TA, lead back to the candidate experience, because I think it affords us a very different way of treating talent, but also how much more empowered talent is when they are applying for jobs, making decisions about jobs, having data about things they never had data before. It's turning work on its head very much. But I'm just interested if we can talk a bit about particularly this personalization of candidate experience, while you're also balancing your internal and your external hiring strategies?
Yeah, so I think if I may start, what AI can help us do more, and I know some companies are leveraging it already, others may be more at a starting point of that, is really hyper personalize the communication and the interaction with candidates, right? Meaning that if I apply to 5 jobs in a company, the AI tool would know that and would address me in that way, where I'm not just getting turned down for 1 job and then I don't hear about the other 4, and I wonder, does it mean I'm turned out for everything, or right? So those are the things where there's still some flaws today, and where I think the technology could help us in addressing people in a very, very specific and personalized way, considering all the data points that we have around them. Similarly, if you're thinking about talent nurturing, right? I think all companies experience hiring freeze, hiring go, hiring freeze, hiring go, right? That's tough for the TA team to manage. So if you're going to an approach where you say we're constantly nurturing talent independent on recs that are open or not, again, I think that's a field where AI can help tremendously, because it's always a challenge to keep track of who has been talking to a certain person, especially if it goes over a longer while, let's say 6 months, a year, and so on, keeping the content of that conversation. So if somebody else picks it up, you know, where has it stopped? What's relevant to that person? Why have we engaged? Where are they in their openness to continue the engagement? So that's a very early part of obviously attracting talent, where I haven't seen that much myself yet in terms of technology helping there, but I could imagine that coming rather soon.
Yeah, I've seen some early examples where that is exactly happening. The kind of activation of pre-acquired candidates, so to say. I think this will actually become an increasingly big part of what AI can do, because the other side of it is that when you have to acquire candidates, it now comes at a significant degree of risk. Anybody who's posted a job in the last 12 months will tell you they get inundated with applications now. Because of course candidates are also using AI, and they're also personalizing, and they're also doing mass supply. So I think pretty soon that we're going to end up having a deterrent towards advertising jobs publicly, because we're kind of inviting more work than we can tolerate. And so we'll start looking at other ways in which we can find candidates. Guess what? You've already pre-acquired candidates. Every company, there's 150 people listening to this. Guarantee you, if you added up all of the database records in 150 companies, so for people watching this, you get into the tens of millions of records. We have accumulated huge amounts of data that's just sitting there. Now, what AI can do is reactivate that data, and this is classic talent relationship management, which pre-AI we had something like that, with a little bit more sophisticated decision trees type stuff and software that helped, if this person did that, then we're gonna send this. But now, genuinely, we might have AI that's able to have a much more fluid, interactive conversation, quote unquote, with every single record in there that wants to have a conversation with us. And I think that's going to be a kind of a very rich source of candidates in the very near future, with very little human effort, to be honest. Pre-acquired candidates, alumni networks, existing employees within companies, in terms of internal mobility, talent liquidity, and that type of stuff. AI should unlock a lot of that stuff, a lot of that activity. And so we as TA, it's part of the reason, again, we need to, have the imagination to expand scope beyond just acquisition of candidates. Talent acquisition is externally hiring candidates in. But the business doesn't really care about that. It cares about having the human capital, the capacity to do a certain function at the certain time when it's needed. And what we've got to do is be the function that's able to supply that need. So it's
Yeah.
much more about like business capacity supply. That's what we've got to do.
Yeah.
And talent acquisition in terms of hiring external people is one of those ways we can do it. But there's now many other ways. And again, we have to embrace those opportunities, expand scope in terms of what we have to do.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And I think what helps us there as well is that in the meantime, we're seeing chatbots where we can't like differentiate, or we can't realize it's a chatbot, right? It's so good that you're actually feeling you're talking to a human being. For sure, there is room for advancement there, but I think we're seeing things getting there, and that makes the experience for people a better one, a more positive one, versus a clunky one where you're desperately looking for that human being to interact with.
Yeah. And I think as well, Elke and Hung, that whilst at the same time you've got all of this, all this greater efficiency with AI in terms of some of your talent pipelining or your talent engagement work, I think at the same time it's going to create corners of need for real kind of white glove treatment with talent. So, talked about talent concierges or talent butlers, people who actually really allows you to be very selective about where you place that very, white glove treatment. And also, I think we're going to see a nice return to recruiters as career counselors, who are having proper advisory conversations, pulling from that sort of more exec search type of approach where you're giving advice to people as opposed to sort of transacting your way through a list of questions. And I think that it's a fabulous opportunity to really define the role of the recruiter now, and I think it will professionalize it, and I think it will regulate it, and probably lend a lot more compliance around it as well. And most people are very well informed these days. I think your career is sort of in your hands, particularly as the data becomes a lot more transparent. So yeah, I think and I think as well on the back of that, we look at our jobs differently. Like we're now entitled to talk a lot more about fulfillment in our careers in a way that perhaps we didn't so much before, because we can make choices. So yeah, the world of work is changing way beyond the activities that we're doing in talent acquisition. Okay, so where do you see this going then? I mean, do you think that we're kind of, we talked a bit about the fact that things are going to get better / worse, depending on which way you look at it. Do you think, perhaps Elke, there are parts of the world of talent attraction that could be even better served by AI that maybe hasn't been thought of yet? Do you see that world will grow and grow and grow, or do you think that we can see as far as it needs to go right now?
Yeah. I'll combine this, Teresa, with Stina's question that I see in the chat where she's saying we talked about pre-selection quite a bit. Can AI solve other pain points in later parts of the process? And if I can start with that, maybe definitely. I mean, you have tools sending out prep material for interviews to applicants and to hiring managers, doing the follow-up. I guess many TA teams are still challenged with ensuring they get timely feedback after interviews from hiring managers. That's something that AI can do for you. Some companies go as far as having AI doing the pre-interview. That's happening already as well, right? If you go down the road, you can have a bot do your offer letter creation. That technology is there as well already, right? Obviously, you can have bots do candidate feedback and drop those few feedback questions out to applicants at each step in the process, right? So I think there's a lot out there already, and with technology progressing, I think the opportunities are probably infinite in terms of the sheer technological capacity. But I think that's the space for us to shape things and to reflect, like, where do we want the technology to take over versus where do we want that human in the loop, or maybe more than just in the loop, and still valuing that human relationship and that human interaction and that part of the experience, versus the efficiency, right? I think Han touched on this earlier. So technologically, as far as I understand it, I don't think there's really limits. You have onboarding that's facilitated with AI in the meantime in virtual rooms where AI technology makes that experience much more exciting and real. So that's out there already as well. So again, I think technology is infinite. It's on us to really define where we wanna leverage it and what that part of the job is that we feel we still owe it to our customers, be it the applicants, be it the hiring managers, to still do it ourselves and bring that human touch in and that creativity, and to some extent as well a bit of that assessment, if I may say, because I haven't seen yet AI that is uncovering the hidden gems, for example. So that talent that may fit greatly to your role, but is not ticking the box on the classical job requirements, but is bringing some other skills, competencies, background that may approach the job from a different angle. That's, I think, still a piece where I haven't seen a technology that can do that. Not saying it may not come, but that's where we still have a unique kind of value proposition as humans, I would say.
It would be great, wouldn't it? Yeah, interesting. Anything you would add to that, Hung?
No, I think sort of Elke definitely covered sort of the scope of the potential of artificial intelligence. I think people listening to this will think, what's left for humans, so to say. I've got a theory on it, and it's kind of sort of aligned with the last thing that Elke mentioned. So firstly, artificial intelligence is certainly going to outcompete human beings whenever there's explicit information that's structured and documented. It's just literal base cases. So anything that we're doing where it's documented information, where it's structured and it's explicit, meaning it's not inferred, it's literally written down, then AI is going to take that on. Now, where human beings come into play is where the information that's implicit and undocumented, and that is the reading in between the lines. That is the, what do you really mean by that comment? That is the off-the-record conversation you have with the hiring manager. Tell me really, why is this job open? And it's off the record, all right? Those kinds of conversations are often the most important ones that you have in your professional life, because they're the deep motivations that have, created those circumstances. And I think that we probably will never have AI dealing with that, and we probably don't want it, because that type of human interaction, human exchange, is what intuition is. It's basically what institutional knowledge might be. If you look at, for instance, the failure of companies to immediately replicate the success of another company, even though they may have stolen the manuals of how to do something, or even with that original company literally said, do it like this, other companies try to replicate it, doesn't work. Why? Because there's like loads of holes that have not been documented. Now, here's the thing. AI is really good at everything that's documented information, but human beings are really good at the undocumented side of it, which is, by the way, part of the reason why I've been traveling as much as I have, because I'm interacting with people in real life, in person. Why? Because I need to get that implicit information. I need to have that sort of peer-to-peer information that isn't written down. I spend way too much of my life locked into the matrix, looking at a computer screen, imbibing information. That's what recruitment brain food is. I dare say a lot of recruiters are currently doing this, but you have to complement and corroborate that information with in-person interaction. And I think if we kind of commit to that, we're going to end up with an edge. We're going to end up like as an AI-enabled recruiter that has the edge because we also have access to collective intelligence because we're speaking to our communities, we're speaking to our candidates, we're speaking to our peers. That collective intelligence plus artificial intelligence, I think, is the future for recruiting.
And that's a very, very important thought to end on. So thanks for that, Hung. I think we're just about at time. So remains for me to say thank you everyone for joining. Thank you to Elke. Thank you to Hung. Some interesting discussions. Hopefully it was thought-provoking and useful for you. And I'll hand it back to Rhonda. Thanks, Rhonda.
Absolutely. And thank you. I definitely want to take the time to thank all of the presenters and all of you for joining us, and to Eightfold AI for sponsoring the webcast. Just take a moment to fill out the feedback survey. Once I close out the session, it's going to pop open on a browser, on a new browser on your computer, on a new tab. And just fill that out. Your feedback is super important to us and the folks at Eightfold and the presenters here today. And if you have come late or you'd like to view this again, it has been recorded just now and it will be archived shortly on hr.com. The HRCI and the SHRM credits, those will be in your account within 24 hours. And we will also send an email to the live attendees with your credit information. And then once you fill out that feedback survey to go to the next session, you would just head back to the webcast auditorium and join the next one. Again, thank you so much, Teresa, Elke, and Hung. Take great care, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. Bye-bye.
See you later.